you. Thank you for coming. My name is Todd Field, and I'll be moderating a conversation with Ashley Judd, Lori Singer, and with Victor Nunez. These conversations are, I find all too often absorbed with a lot of biographical introductions to people that require very little introduction, if any, but I thought I would just sort of make a couple of comments. This retrospective is long overdue for Victor, and it's just a tremendous opportunity to watch his body of work in one film in relationship to the other. Today, we had the great privilege of watching Ruby in Paradise, starring Ashley Judd, and now watching Rachel Hendrix, starring Lori Singer. These two films are as we'll get into the conversation, very much companion pieces for those of you who have seen both these films. I thought, as opposed to a moderated conversation, this will probably be much more of a loose conversation, and we'll open up some questions from the audience as well at a certain point. So I'd like to bring out first Ashley Judd, please. Lori Singer. And Mr. Victor Nunez.
Here we go.
Wow, so I guess I'd start the conversation by asking you this question, Victor, which is, maybe start actually asking a question about Ruby in Paradise, because after seeing Rachel Hendrix before with you in Santa Barbara, we were talking afterwards with Lori, and you had said, very much these two are companion pieces. It's the ideas of a woman at a certain point, a young woman at a certain point of her life, looking at finding her identity at that point in her life, and then this woman at a different point in her life. And I wonder if maybe you could sort of talk about, with the first film, where did that come from? I remember being at the Sundance Film Festival and having somebody buttonhole me after a screening and saying, where is she? And I said, who, Ashley? And they said, no, Victoria. And I said, Victoria? They said, Victoria Nunez. I said, no, it's Victor Nunez. They said, well, the man couldn't have made this film. I said, no, he's quite a man. So where did you get the idea to tell the story about a young woman in these circumstances?
You got a while? I think I've thought a lot, and I've had this question asked in various, Ruby in Paradise wasn't the first female-centric movie that I made, and I remember getting attacked in the 70s by the super radical wing of the original feminist movement. Fortunately, there were a lot of very smart people there as well, and I didn't have to try to defend it. Briefly, I think the argument is that I came to film with a love of story and a love of what stories are about. That's one thing. As an only child of an only parent, mom, growing up, I think I grew up watching and being fascinated by, in terms of the biggest sense of, they were the ones that I saw dealing with issues. They were the ones that I found a lot more interesting than the guys. There was something, I say right now, I think it's the guys that are having to deal with a lot of stuff. But I think until recently, it was, and so there was always something, and there's Wendy Lesser has a great book about say only, without trying to get into too much trouble, there is something to be said about the mirror or reflection of going through a different lens of gender or something in terms of the experiences you're trying to explore. When I set out to do Rachel Hendrix, the thought of dealing with a male griever, when I was having to look at that person every day in the mirror, did not feel like I was going to be able to get very far. Doing it this way, I felt like I had a chance to get to a different place. But to your specific question, when I was looking for a story, I had gone 10 years without a movie, which is another long thing, which again, this is not the time. But when I started looking, I remembered going to Panama City as a kid from Tallahassee with a group at the beach, and then you'd go into the place to get your beach towel or whatever, and there would more often than not be a young lady behind the counter. And I just remember thinking, here we are going to the beach, and this person is working. And what is her life like, and what got her there? And that simple thought was the genesis of Ruby in Paradise, because it was just fascinating. It just exploded, in terms of why would that be? When we shot the film, we shot the drive away, the escape from Tennessee in the fall. No one, and I can say this, when I took the script around, they said it, no one is interested in a young lady shop clerk at the beach. And I said, what? So I shot the scene of leaving. Gus Holzer, a friend of mine, and I went up, and it was the World Series, and we shot the drive away because I knew seasonally I had to do it then. But I had no idea for 4 months how this film was going to get made. We got to make it miraculously, and I could tell the story with Lori. Somehow, Ashley read the script, somehow we met, and somehow I knew, driving over the hill from the valley into Topanga, that the person that had the closest heart and grasp of this story was Ashley. And I think we took a wild chance on each other, and it paid off. I also had a little help from some guys, and I thought Bentley was going to come, but we had a ticket for him. But I think, what's wonderful about movies is you have to have a lot of people. And Renoir's thing about the theatrical convention, no one person in that group knows everything. And if you don't have a group together, you really won't have the soul of a human being. We do, and that's so. Is that enough said?
Yes. No, but I was interested only because I think you were alluding to this. When you started, Gal Youngin also, you're talking about a woman's story, you're talking about a portrait of a female character, and that's what you spend a good part of your story telling.
It's a good part of my growing up, and I think that you probably are impressed by that stuff. Sometimes I find myself, like right now, talking so much, I don't say, well, how did I ever? By and large, what you do is you listen a lot and you watch a lot, and it's the stuff that you almost see out of your corner of your eye that is the most memorable. And I don't know. There's something I've been accused. Why don't you just become a writer? And I don't know how to write, and I don't know how to in a novel. And there's this theory but something about seeing people in what's almost like, it's not subverbal, but it's the foundation of how we communicate. In one sense, what we say is babble. It's just noises we make for each other, like apes. But what we do and what we say when we look at each other, or when we sense each other's presence, that's what's really exciting. And I think that's what film can do. And not every time, you don't want it all the time, but occasionally it's kind of a nice thing, wherever it comes from, to be seeing. E.M. Forster said, and this is the problem of the novel, we know people better in a novel than we could ever know them in life. I think at times there's an opportunity in film to do something similar. And why do we bother to do that? Because it helps us to understand our own life. And that, to me, the final end of a movie is when each person leaves, and if they have taken something home with them that makes them feel more alive themselves. That's what it's all about. And otherwise, there are other things to do.
Yes, well, and that leads me to my other sort of, I don't know if it's a question, but I mean, just an observation, obvious observation, which is that you work in a literary manner, and your films.
I've been attacked for that.
Well, I've been attacked for it. I think it's wonderful, I mean, you accept it if you're French, but you seem to be an outlier in American cinema and have been for a very long time, and which is why your work is so vital. I think that, or one of the reasons, I'm curious because I spoke with you earlier today, and we were talking, and you said, I don't remember when we were making Ruby in Paradise, but did we rehearse much? And I said, sometimes we did. Sometimes we rehearsed much. Which sort of leads me to, I wanted to ask Lori about this, because I remember when we rehearsed and when we didn't, even though I was only there for a small portion of it. But how much rehearsal did you have with Victor, and what was that rehearsal like?
Well, we rehearsed a lot around Victor. For example, we'd be in the room where we're supposed to shoot, and we just start rehearsing, start going over it, start playing with it, and that was our process. We were actually in the house rehearsing. We were actually in the locations, actually rehearsing in the specific place where we were shooting. So it was special. It was special that way.
I should interrupt because I think in both cases, Ashley, you were talking about the script. And the best directing you can do is a script. And as it happens, I was on a plane to go meet Ashley, and we canceled the flight because the next day Broadway shut down, and it was COVID. So Lori had the script for a year, and she came and she knew it better than I did. And I think that's the biggest gift, and I suspect that, in fact, I'm pretty sure that you knew when the scene, for example, it's the journal scenes, when those things, what's going on in Ashley's face when she begins her journal. And I asked her once, and she said, of course I knew what I was saying. What I was writing, because, you're looking up at here, you're not down. But just to say that the first rehearsal, and when it is the script, and it's because in the script, the actor gets to own it and take possession of it. And they then end up, everything they do is a surprise to the writer, because you had talent and you have brought your stuff. And so Lori always kids me about the rehearsal, but she came prepared. And
totally, Victor. Just so you know, I don't know how it was in Ruby in Paradise.
Well, Ruby in Paradise,
Just
I think
so you know,
Ashley was living in her apartment.
Yeah.
In that little.
Right, in that little place.
I know you spent a lot of time.
In the house?
Well, in the house,
Yeah.
you spent a lot of time in all the locations.
Yes.
Yeah, that I do.
Yes. We did also.
Yeah,
But I would-
we couldn't find it.
I'm curious, because it was a juggling act. The scene with the pasta and talking about Jane Austen, and you thinking about the green sweater. How much did we rehearse that? Do you remember that scene?
Wait, are you talking about Ruby in Paradise?
Yeah, Ruby in Paradise.
I just remember being terrified. I mean, because this was your first, was that your first film?
Yes, Ruby in Paradise was my first movie.
So, I mean, Ashley, this is her first film. I arrived late. You had the presence of mind. She was in it. She was living it, I had made a few Roger Corman movies and a couple of studio films, but, there's Victor's way of working is very, it's a very, very intimate process. If you're on Victor's set, you're on Victor's set, and it's not, it's very inclusive. You know, the boundaries are normal, there has to be a hierarchy, Victor is the filmmaker, but by the same token, the conversation is extremely fluid and, but guided, you know? And I'd never met a filmmaker before, maybe I hadn't met, but that made me read books, you know? Like Victor makes you read Faulkner, you know? It's like, and you think, okay, where's this going, you know? And then you realize, oh, okay, I know exactly where this is going, right? This is the rhythm of this character. This is something that
Mike McCaslin,
over there, right? It has to be in your bones. But when you guys had already done a great deal of work before I ever arrived, and I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, Ashley. What was that like when you first got there, and how are you feeling? Do you feel like this was your first role? When you got to Panama City, do you feel like as you began to go through things that you were feeling stronger? You must have arrived with a fair amount of healthy anxiety, huh?
Well, now that I'm going to speak, I think I'm gonna cry first because the movie means so much to me, and it means so much to be with Victor. Thank you, Todd, for choosing to organize the Victor Nunez retrospective, and congratulations, Lori, on such a fine performance. When to arrive at Panama City Beach, Florida, I drove through the hollers of eastern Kentucky, first of all, or of East Tennessee. I'm from Appalachia. You know, my grandmommy's from Black Log Holler in Martin County, from which Sarge Shriver declared the war on poverty in 1968. So I know from whence Ruby comes, but I drove through those parts in East Tennessee to really refamiliarize myself with Ruby's background, and specifically, you know, where she was getting out without getting pregnant or beat up, and to know the precise place, you know, from where that boy was throwing the shoe at her in the car, and in the car. And then when I got to Panama City Beach and moved into the Admiral Benbow Inn, our fine accommodations.
Where you changed bedrooms every night because of the bed bugs.
Keith, you got it.
I went to the Waffle House, and was it B-25, my favorite Vince Gill and Dolly Parton song on the jukebox. You know, I did live as much as I could in my little house where we filmed, and I remember sleeping in the bed and kind of waking up with Victor and camera lighting around me. So it was a very pure experience, and part of what I wanted to address is the richness of the interior life of the characters that Victor writes. And so, of course, there is the journaling, and so I have the interior life of the green sweater living in me as Todd and I are acting the scene and living this romance that is both strong and has legs and is sweet and tender and deep, and also has its ambiguities and its tensions of class, you know, which is something that I hope we can talk about in Victor's work. And it was just beautiful. You know, there's such depth in your screenplays. There's such.
Well, we have a lot of time to
There's-
write them.
There's such depth of meaning and character and exploration. And I also want to address the thing about gender, because yes, it's coming through a very particular gendered experience, and there's also these universal themes. You know, I ask as Ruby, where does caring come from? And I also say with Rochelle, what would you teach children? I mean, you know, these are humanist questions. And, you know, it was just the privilege of a lifetime, and the movie means so much to me, and it's really good too.
Well, yeah, let's do it. I'll start crying. I think one of the things that, the advantage of being a small film in sort of something approaching the world that you're trying to film, is that the world can penetrate and influence in a way. The membrane is very thin between the making of the film and the world you're filming in. And it's amazing how things I always tell students, know your script so well that if everything that you plan is taken away from you, and you walk into another room, you will know what you need to do in that room to do that scene in that moment. And you have actors, again, you know exactly so well where the characters are supposed to be that you can adjust. And then what happens is often something that nobody thought of, the process reveals. And that's when it's kind of magical, I think.
So when you began Rachel Hendrix, and I don't think I'm saying anything, stop me if I am, too personal, because it's been written about, but, you know, your loss that you experienced, obviously this film is informed by that, and as you pointed out, changing the lead character to a woman losing her husband as opposed to a husband losing his wife, gave you at least one step removed. But I struck this time watching in this epistolary thing, much like the journaling in Ruby, where she's changing the gender, right? She's stepping into it, and that reversal is so resonant. It really, really struck me this time, really, like a very, very powerful box within a box within a box, you know. And I wonder, when you started talking about the film together, how much did you deal with it? Did you take it as it came in terms of the script? What was that conversation like for you?
Well, first of all, Ashley, you are so stunning in Ruby in Paradise. It's such a touching, moving performance. I just want to say, it was just brilliant, really. And also, it's just, Todd is a beautiful performance in the movie. And Victor, you know, it really is Victor. I mean, he really brings it to, reaches in, seriously, and brings something that you've never expected. And it was, I feel, kind of a different situation, or perhaps it was similar, but I think Rachel Hendrix was different in the sense that this was really someone who was in so much pain that Victor kept, speaking of Victor's conversations, that it's so much that he kept saying she's present, but she's not present. And so then you think, well, what does that mean? You're present, but you're not present. And it was really constant that he was, no, you're not present, okay? So it was an interesting thing, because I had in my script, I you know, for each scene, like a different tiny bit of a color of what I was thinking of, how much or who I was missing at that moment. What aspect of my husband was I missing? What of Carl was I missing? You know, in the room, was it that I saw him there because I was going on and speaking normally to my daughter, or was it that I just remembered that he had just told me something and now she was saying it and it was similar? In other words, each scene there was something that I was recalling about him, or about a moment that we had in our lives. And I found a lot of the clues just in the writing, in the sense that I saw Jimmy, my son, on the screen, on my little, you know, phone, but I only really knew him as a little child. And that's why my memory of him was as a little child, and that was another pain, that I didn't even know him. And so there were a lot of things, you know, sort of grasping at being in a situation, being with a wonderful community of teachers, everyone in a different way, kind of bickering about things that I thought were so maybe not important, but they were so important to those teachers that I cared for, that it made it important. It was just sort of being in the midst of a life and not feeling really connected, because she no longer was a daughter, her parents weren't there, she no longer was a wife because her husband wasn't there, she no longer was a mom because she couldn't relate to her son.
Or her daughter.
Well, the daughter was kind of, you know, yeah, the daughter was sort of telling her she was gonna sell the house. I mean, so it was an interesting, you know, juxtaposition of trying to be an authoritarian person and, you know, feeling very much in control when in fact you're really lost. And so it was an interesting puzzle to play those little subtleties really honestly at every turn. And that's Victor, that is Victor, really.
You know,
because-
again,
Yeah,
I think there's a, we should,
considering what you said, I'm gonna interrupt.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
I'm gonna interrupt
Now we're
because-
rolling.
Because there's some things that need to be said since we're here,
Yeah.
so let's say them. And Maura, you touched on something I think is really important, which is, Victor has, it's not just the main characters. He has a way of creating a life around those main
Yeah.
characters that's so specific, that's so important in terms of the way life is observed, you know. And I'm struck by that watching Rachel tonight, and I'm struck by that seeing Ruby and Paradise for the first time in a very, very long time. And 30 years since I've seen it on screen, and you know, Mary Ann from next door, is that her name? What's the neighbor's name that comes over to visit at her place?
Something-
that brings
I think
in
that's close,
piece
yes.
of the pie.
Oh, yeah.
the chess pie.
The chess pie, yeah. And it's just like the people that cross your path every day. That's really what your life is like. Your life are about these moments every single day, an exchange with a post person or somebody at a store or you know, and these moments are almost in a very kind of almost like it's some horrible cinematic rule, are always supposed to be equational and add up to some great plot point, you know. And life's not like that.
Yeah, that is the plot.
That
That is it.
That's it, exactly. And that's what's so extraordinary about your work. And it's not something, you know, I was looking at a film, Ashley and I were talking earlier today, and she said, have you seen it? What have you looked at lately? You know, I see, you know. And you would probably know her work, Larissa Shevchenko's work, you know her films, don't you? Russian filmmaker. She made a couple of incredible films and died way too early. But she is a perfect example. You have to go back to like the 60s to a Russian filmmaker to see her doing the kinds of things that you see in Victor's films. And I think it's a kind of cinema that is so important and so profoundly moving that you simply don't see.
Yep, I don't know anyone that, I mean, really, Victor is so.
I just about lived my peers. I mean, I do think that one of the things that's interesting is that in the 60s, and it's probably hard to wrap your head around, the movies that were exciting and exhilarating came from overseas. And it wasn't just Europe, it was Japan, it was India, it was South America. And you saw people, and again, you were connecting with people, some that you knew nothing about their lives, but what mattered was that you were getting inside them. And I don't know where that got lost in our, I think something about streaming, I had this, if a successful filmmaker today dies and goes to heaven, except it's not really heaven, he's gonna be told, you get to have all the food you have ever wanted in your life, but it's all gonna come from the OK Corral, from the Golden Corral, or whatever name your buffet chain is. And what's wonderful is that we're different. And the 60s somehow, and the 70s, I remember Pauline Kael once said, I think it was in the late 60s, who would have thought there was not another new masterpiece from Fellini, Bergman, Truffaut, Godard. And so I don't want to claim anything just except having hung around.
No,
I just want to jump in and say that also the acting from the ensemble is so uniformly superb. And that has to do with the quality of the writing that you have provided and the nuance and the subtlety of the performances that you're always able to dive out of your actors. And also point out that in Ruby in Paradise, there are so many women of color in the cast. And this movie is 30 years old. You know, Rochelle, my best friend, is a woman of color. And when I'm hiring as the assistant director, or when, Ms. Chambers hires the 2 additional women to work in the shop, one of them is a woman of color. And Wanda and Persefina in the laundry, and my mom always, just would randomly sigh on an afternoon, Wanda and Persefina are still in the laundry. Really made a real impression on my mom as well. One of them was a woman of color. And then also in the bar where the men are paying to exploit the woman, and the woman who's dancing, as is, more often the case, because women of color are disproportionately represented in prostitution and systems of sexual exploitation, is a woman of color. And
Well, I was also gonna say about the characters, all of the, as Todd was mentioning, the people that you pass in the day, that this will happen or that will happen in your life, and you may not think it means anything at that moment, but the way Victor captures it is so vivid that it means more. But I think part of it also is that he gives that then to the perspective of whoever is seeing it, because then it adds something to that, decision. For example, when Ruby has some decisions to make, it's partially because of the vivid people that are populating her world that she makes those decisions. And it's the same in a way, because you feel it, and you feel her choice even with men, and you feel the decision, even if you feel maybe it was the wrong decision, you feel it's
Ruby
it's
is a busy
Ruby's
movie.
decision.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
busy movie, I
Yeah.
realize.
yes.
But it's also, it's the rhythms of those encounters, it's the rhythms of whatever passive observation that character is having that put you into a mood that you recognize because it's life.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, it puts you into a stream of water that its temperature
One of the things
is familiar.
And I think as a cautionary, sort of going back the other way, this is not everyone's cup of tea. And I don't think it's anyone's, always cup of tea. So, you run a risk, which is, I always say that's why you make very small movies. You don't have to satisfy millions of people. But you go in believing that there will be people for whom this kind of experience is entertaining in the best way, in the sense of something that because you've done it, you feel better, even if it's a sad or terrible story. And what's fascinating to me about actors, because we talk about living in the house, but it's that they're magical. You all are magical because something you read a scene, a script or something, and you can deliver outwardly what we all feel inside. And it is an intangible, I have no idea how it's done. I really don't. It's an honor and a privilege to be behind the camera and see it happen. Because it's just, I think it's the most exciting part of what theater is. I mean, for me again, what is art in the big generic sense for? It's to activate us and ourselves in our engagement with each other and with life. And these three here, and I have occasionally made, Jimmy Wing is a guy, as it happens, and Yuli is also, Yuli Jackson is a beekeeping guy, but I feel them all as part of some kind of a family of, it is, and this is not to get on dangerous ground, but I think it's the quality of empathy that literature has had and that we are sort of losing, and we need to grab again, because we need to do the cliche of walk in each other's shoes, walk a mile in shoes. Movies can do that, and seeing movies can do that. And I just think that, it doesn't really help to, anyway.
Then make another one, Victor.
Yeah, make another one. Thank you for coming.
Did you want to do a QA just quickly?
Oh, yeah.
Questions?
Do we have time for a couple questions? Does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry, I promised that.
We actually don't have time, I'm so sorry.
You don't? Okay, all right.
Thank you all so much.